Hello, I'm Tashawn and this is Legacy Liner. Welcome aboard. In today's video, we're going to be talking about my trip to Boston and going to the Titanic Artifact Exhibit in Boston. So, without any further delay, let's get into it. One of the first things that you see whenever you enter the exhibit is the Titanic's bell from the crow's nest. And this is significant to the Titanic story because this is the bell that Frederick Fleet would have rang 3 times to notify the bridge that there was ice ahead. And in an old documentary that Dr. Ballard did, he mentions that when they first found the shipwreck, on the forward mast, the crow's nest and the bell was still there. Apparently, in the process of cutting the bell off, they knocked the crow's nest down and it fell into a cargo hold. That's what I heard Dr. Ballard say in a documentary he did probably like 15, 20 years ago. But it was very surreal to be standing there in front of this object that had so much significance to the story of this event. And of course, it was exciting for me because that's like the first artifact you saw walking in. So it just gets you excited for what else the exhibit had in store. Another cool artifact that they had was they had one of the bollards or bits from the Titanic's poop deck. And for those of you that don't know, a bollard or a bit, it's used to tie the line off whenever a ship is docking. It's usually called a bollard whenever it's on a boat, and it's called a bit whenever it's on a dock or on a pier on land. But those terms do get used interchangeably, and in 1912 I wouldn't be surprised if they like flip-flop what they call them. Either way, it's a bollard or a bit, and I thought it was so interesting seeing this because they were able to tell exactly what section of the ship it most likely came from. It was also a little eerie for me because I couldn't help but think about how the poop deck is where a lot of these passengers who were left behind would have congregated. And so this is where a lot of the victims of the sinking would have spent their final moments, and people would have been clinging to this, or even worse, hitting up against it as they were tumbling down the ship's decks. It definitely is one of those artifacts where it's cool to see, but when I think about the location of it and what it would have seen in the Titanic's final moments, it was a bit of an eerie feeling standing so close to something. But not even just that, I also couldn't help but think about the children like Frank Goldsmith who were running around playing on the Titanic in the third class section, and they were climbing on the cranes and everything else. I can't help but think about how, the children playing might have sat on this bit so that they could catch their breath in between playing tag or just running around all day. And so it is one of those things where you can't help but think, who touched this last? And if this thing could talk, what would it say? What did it see? And of course, it would not be a Titanic exhibit if it didn't have some sort of mini recreation of different sections of the ship. And so not too long after you go in, they do have a recreation of the first class corridor, or at least one of them, where you can walk through. And it's very cool that they're trying to give you like that Titanic feel. I'm not gonna lie though, they're not very accurate. With Titanic Honor and Glory, we can now see very detailed virtual recreations of what the ship's interiors look like. And we now know that the first class corridor, it didn't look the way that it's shown in the movie. And it seems like this exhibit took a little bit of the movie and mixed it with like a little bit of like the 2010s type of style. And so even though I do appreciate that they attempted to recreate the first class corridor. Full transparency, I kind of would like if they made it a little bit more to the authentic version versus the film version. Another one of the cool things that I really enjoyed walking through was that they had a lot of floor tile. They had a lot of tile from different sections of the ship. For example, they had the floor tile from the first class dining saloon, and that was just crazy to see how vibrant that color still is after decades of being at the bottom of the North Atlantic. And also just knowing that some of the wealthiest people on the ship, and in the world in that case, possibly could have walked over this tile when they were going to their dinner at some point during the voyage in 1912. They also had floor tile from the ship's first class bathrooms. Or should I say one of the first class bathrooms. That's one of the things that people don't really know about the Titanic, is that back in those days, it wasn't common for cabins, even first class cabins, to have their own bathrooms yet. I did a video on hygiene, like the Titanic soap, and I go a little bit more in detail in that video. I would say one of the coolest things to see, and I've been to multiple Titanic exhibits and museums, and so some of these I have seen more than once, but one of the things there that I had never seen before was the Titanic's davits. They had one of the ship's davits just on display, and it was amazing to see the size of one of these davits. It makes sense because the lifeboats on the Titanic were about 30 feet in length. And I saw that the average American school bus, back when I was a kid, was about 30, 35 feet. They're a little bit larger now, more in the 40 feet range. But that's still a crazy thought to me, is that the lifeboats on the Titanic are roughly about the size of a school bus. And so it would make sense that these davits have to be so large to lower these boats with that many people in them. Another artifact that I really enjoyed was the megaphone. It was in pretty rough shape, which makes sense. It looks like the part of it that was buried underneath the sediment is kind of like what preserved it. I'm not sure. It could have been the opposite. It could have been the part that was exposed is what was preserved, but I'm assuming it's what's buried. But nonetheless, it was so cool standing in front of this megaphone, because according to the little plaque, it said that Titanic only had 2 of these. And Captain Smith was said to have been shouting out orders during the sinking. He was trying to get some of the lifeboats that were rowing away to come back to the ship. James Cameron even put this in the movie, but then he ended up taking it out and deleting it. So it's one of the deleted scenes. I couldn't help but think, like, is this the one that Captain Smith would have been shouting out some of his final orders of his career through? I just couldn't help but think about that. I do also have to mention that there was a cool part where you got to touch a piece of the Titanic. Like, they have a little glass where you can stick your finger in there and touch one of the steel plates from the ship. And so if you go to this exhibit, when you leave, you get to say that you touched a piece of the Titanic. I think while making this video, I can't help but bring up how some people think bringing up artifacts is disrespectful, it's wrong, and some people feel like, oh, this is preserving history. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I believe in bringing up artifacts. However, I don't think that anybody should personally profit from it. I think that if an artifact is brought up, it should be given to a museum, some sort of Titanic exhibit or maritime history exhibit, and nobody should be able to go down to the wreck and get some dishes and take them home. The Titanic shouldn't be a rich person's playground. That's what I'm trying to hint at. It belongs to everyone. So I do believe in artifacts being recovered. I just don't think that it should be something where rich people get to get it all for themselves. Y'all already run the world. Let us at least have artifacts. Jesus. I'm gonna be completely honest. The Titanic nerd in me was super giddy whenever I saw all of the parents with their kids walking them to the artifacts, trying to explain as best as they could, like, oh, look at this. This is how this would have worked. This is what they use this for. And I was just like, yes, parents like continuing to educate. I love it. And so that's my experience of the Titanic exhibit in Boston. But that is something that I want to ask you guys. Tell me in the comments, what is your favorite Titanic artifact that you have seen? But that's my video on going to the Titanic exhibit in Boston. Don't forget to like and subscribe. In the meantime, y'all be safe and have a good one.